In this video, I'm going to talk about the mechanism of gastric acid secretions and the role of Helicobacter pylori in gastric ulcer. Gastric acids are secreted from parietal cells of the stomach. Usually about 2 liters of hydrochloric acid is secreted per day. And this acidic environment is necessary for digestion of our foods. There are 3 phases of acid secretion. First one is Cephalic Phase. As the name says, cephalon came from cephalon, which means brain. So it indicates before taking the food, just about thinking about the food, so our vagus nerve are stimulated and it can stimulate our parietal cells. And through the vagus nerve, it's like parasympathetic stimulation. So as acetylcholine is stimulating the muscarinic receptors in our stomach cell lines, and after stimulation it causes the hydrochloric acid secretion and also gastrin secretion. The second phase is gastric phase, which happens when the food is already inside the stomach. So because of the food, there is a distension or stretching inside the stomach, which actually leads to further stimulation of vagus nerve, which ultimately leads to more acid secretion. The third phase is intestinal phase, where the chyme enters into the duodenum. So when the chyme enters the duodenum, so then our brain gets the negative feedback signals to stop hydrochloric acid secretion in the stomach, since the food has already left the stomach. So now in this parietal cell, you can see that there are different regulators of hydrochloric acid secretion. The first one we have here is a histamine receptor or H2 receptor. In this receptor, histamine binds, and upon binding of histamine, it stimulates hydrochloric acid secretion. The second one is the muscarinic receptor, M3 receptor, so where acetylcholine binds because of the stimulation of the vagus nerve. And the third one is the gastrin receptor, where gastrin binds. And fourth one is prostaglandin E2 receptor, where prostaglandins will bind. The first 3 receptors, when they bind to their respective ligands, they stimulate the secretion of hydrochloric acid. The last one, the prostaglandin, when it binds to its ligand, it actually inhibits the hydrochloric acid secretion. So hydrochloric acid secretion happens with the help of actually proton pump. So this proton pump, it releases protons, and it actually at the same time it takes away potassium ion inside the cell. So there are different drugs have been developed to target different areas of this hydrochloric acid secretion. For example, the proton pump inhibitors like the omeprazoles and esomeprazole, pantoprazole, so all these drugs, they target this proton pump. They irreversibly inhibit this proton pump so that hydrochloric acid secretion will be stopped. Another type of drugs are called H2 blockers, so like ranitidine, nizatidine, famotidine. So these drugs bind to these H2 receptors and then block this receptor, which will ultimately reduce the hydrochloric acid secretion. So these are the 2 primary type of anti-ulcer drugs we have. And there are other drugs like antacids. So antacids don't have any specific receptors, but they actually increase the pH of the stomach. So they neutralize the hydrochloric acid inside the stomach. And for muscarinic receptors, we have dicyclomine, which can inhibit this muscarinic receptor. And for the prostaglandin receptor, we have misoprostol. Misoprostol, when it binds to this prostaglandin receptor, it stimulates the prostaglandin receptor, and which ultimately inhibit the release of hydrochloric acid. And the next type of drug target for gastric acidity is Helicobacter pylori. Helicobacter pylori is actually a bacteria which is a gram-negative rod-shaped bacteria that is present in about 50% of the population, and these bacteria colonize in the gastric mucosa, and these bacteria also have a urease enzyme which actually neutralize the gastric acids, and the urease enzyme produces ammonia inside the stomach, and which help the bacteria to live or colonize in the acidic environment. So when it colonizes, it actually damages the gastric mucosa, leading to ulceration. So the common drugs like H2 blocker or proton pump inhibitors don't act against these bacteria, so we need some antibiotic. So there are actually not only single antibiotic used against Helicobacter pylori, we have about more than one drugs, and they are used in combination. The drugs are like amoxicillin, clarithromycin, metronidazole. So we combine different types of antibiotics to achieve this goal.